The
The
first thing the
situation has
billionaire
escalated. You must act now.
noticed
I
was the
understand. I'm on my
silence.
way.
Not the calm, peaceful kind, but the
Thank you
heavy
for being
silence that
here, my
follows
dear.
bad
Of
news,
course.
the
I love
kind that
you.
lingers in a
I love
hallway
you
long
too.
after a door is closed. He stood in his grand living room, surrounded by wealth, art, and luxury, yet something felt missing. His longtime maid, a woman who had served his household faithfully for years, had suddenly stopped coming to work. No warning, no goodbye, just a short message that said she was sick and could no longer continue. For a man used to control, power, and instant solutions, this was an inconvenience, or so he thought. What he didn't know was that behind that simple message was a family struggling to survive. The maid's daughter, a young girl barely into adulthood, stood in a small, dim room holding her mother's hand. Hospital bills were piling up. Rent was overdue. There was no other source of income. The girl had never worked in a mansion before. She had never worn a uniform. She had never stepped into a world of crystal floors and quiet corridors where one wrong move could cost everything. But she knew one thing. If she didn't take her mother's place, their life would fall apart. So she made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, the massive gates of the billionaire's estate opened, and a nervous young girl stepped inside, carrying more fear than confidence. Her hand shook slightly as she introduced herself. She said she was here to replace her mother just for a little while. The staff looked at her with curiosity, some with doubt. She was younger than expected, quieter than expected, but there was something in her eyes, determination mixed with worry, that made people pause. The billionaire barely glanced at her at first. To him, she was just another face, another employee. He didn't see her story. He didn't see the sacrifices. He didn't see the nights she stayed awake listening to her mother cough, praying for a miracle. All he saw was a young maid trying to fill shoes that seemed too big for her. But from the very first day, things started to feel different. She didn't just clean rooms. She noticed small details others ignored. She fixed things without being asked. She spoke gently to everyone, even when she was tired, and slowly, without meaning to, she began to change the atmosphere of the mansion. The house that once felt cold and distant started to feel warmer. The billionaire began to notice. He noticed how the staff respected her. He noticed how problems seemed to disappear when she was around. And most of all, he noticed a strange feeling he couldn't explain, a feeling that this poor girl carried something far more valuable than skill or obedience. She carried a secret tied to her mother, a secret tied to the past, a secret that, once revealed, would stop the billionaire in his tracks and leave everyone in the room completely stunned. And when he finally learns the real reason this poor girl replaced her mother, his reaction will change everything. The girl's name was Aisha, though very few people in the mansion bothered to ask. To most of the staff, she was simply the new maid, the young replacement who had stepped in quietly and without complaint. But every morning, as she tied her uniform and looked at herself in the small mirror of the staff quarters, she whispered her own name under her breath, as if reminding herself that she was still a person, not just a worker. Each day she carried her mother's old scarf in her pocket, a small piece of home in a place that didn't feel like hers. Her mother, Farah, had worked for the billionaire's family for nearly 15 years. She knew every hallway, every routine, every unspoken rule of the house. She had given her best years to that mansion, often missing her own daughter's school events and birthdays just to make sure the household ran smoothly. Now, lying weak in a hospital bed, Farah felt both proud and terrified that her daughter had taken her place. Proud that Aisha was strong enough to step forward. Terrified that the world of the rich would be too harsh for her. Aisha never told anyone the full truth about her mother's condition. She only said, "She's not well," but behind those words was a deeper struggle. Medical tests, expensive treatment, long waiting hours in hospital corridors that smelled of medicine and worry. Every shift Aisha worked, every floor she cleaned, every room she organized, she counted the hours as money toward keeping her mother alive. In the mansion, whispers began to follow her. Some staff members said she was too polite. Others said she was hiding something. A few noticed how she sometimes paused near the billionaire's private study, staring at the door for a second longer than necessary, as if something inside pulled her toward it. She never went in. She never asked questions, but her silence made people curious. The billionaire, on the other hand, started noticing small changes in himself. He found his mornings less tense. His home felt quieter in a different way, not empty, but thoughtful. He caught himself asking where Aisha was when she wasn't around. It surprised him. He wasn't a man who noticed maids. He noticed numbers, deals, power, and results. Yet this poor girl, with her soft voice and careful steps, was somehow standing out in a house full of professionals. One afternoon, he overheard her on the phone in a quiet corner. She didn't know he was nearby. "Yeah, Sammy, I'll come after my shift," she said softly. "Please don't worry. I'm trying. I promise." Her voice cracked just enough to reveal the weight she carried. The billionaire froze for a moment, pretending not to listen, but something about the word Amy, about the fear hidden in her tone, stayed with him long after. That same day, an old employee approached him with hesitation. The man had worked in the house for decades and had known Aisha's mother well. "Sir," he said carefully, "the girl, she reminded me a lot of her mother, more than you might think." The billionaire looked up, curious now. "What do you mean?" But before the man could explain further, another call pulled him away, and the moment passed. Still, the words lingered. That night, as Aisha finished her work, she stood alone in the hallway, holding her mother's scarf tightly. She knew something was coming. She could feel it. The secret she carried, the reason she had truly taken this job, was getting harder to hide. And somewhere in that massive mansion, the billionaire was getting closer to a truth he wasn't ready for, a truth that would connect his past to this poor girl in a way no one expected. Aisha began to feel the pressure in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the physical work or the long hours. It was a feeling of being watched, not in a cruel way, but in a curious one. The staff noticed her more. The supervisors asked more questions. Even small mistakes felt bigger, as if one wrong move could cost her everything. Yet she kept going, reminding herself that every day in that mansion meant another day her mother could stay in treatment. At the hospital, Farah tried to be strong for her daughter. She smiled even when she was tired. She told Aisha not to worry, that things would work out. But late at night, when Aisha sat by her bedside, holding her hand, she could feel how weak her mother had become. Farah would sometimes start to speak, then stop, as if holding back words she wasn't ready to say. "There are things you don't know," her mother once whispered, her voice barely audible. "Things about this family, about that house." Aisha leaned closer. "What things, Amy?" But Farah closed her eyes, exhausted, leaving Aisha with more questions and answers. Back at the mansion, the billionaire found himself thinking about Farah for the first time in years. He remembered her as loyal, quiet, dependable, a worker who never caused trouble. But now, seeing her daughter, pieces of the past began to feel closer, more personal. He started asking small questions: how long Farah had worked, where she came from, what kind of family she had. The answers were always polite and short. No one seemed to know much. Or maybe they just didn't want to say. Aisha, meanwhile, started to feel torn. Part of her wanted to stay invisible, to just do her job and go home. But another part of her felt a strange pull toward the billionaire's world, toward his office, toward the old photographs on the walls. Sometimes, while dusting, she would stop in front of framed pictures of the billionaire when he was younger, standing with people she didn't recognize. One photo, in particular, made her heart beat faster. A woman stood in the background, her face half turned away, but something about her felt familiar, too familiar. Aisha never mentioned it to anyone, but the image stayed in her mind. At the same time, another subplot quietly began to grow. One of the senior housekeepers, a woman who had always been strict, started watching Aisha with sharp eyes. She asked pointed questions. She checked her work more closely than others. There was a tension there, unspoken but clear. It felt like the housekeeper knew something or suspected something and wasn't comfortable with the girl being there. The billionaire also noticed this shift. He noticed how some staff treated Aisha differently. He noticed how conversations stopped when she entered a room. It didn't sit right with him. For the first time, he started to wonder if this poor girl was carrying more than just financial stress. One evening, he called for Aisha to bring tea to his study. Her hands trembled slightly as she knocked and entered. The room felt heavier than usual, filled with old books, memories, and quiet power. He looked at her longer this time, really looked at her face, her eyes, the way she held herself. "You're Farah's daughter," he said calmly. "Yes, sir," Aisha replied. "She worked here a long time." "Yes, sir." He paused, as if wanting to say more, but holding back. "If there's anything you need related to your work, you can speak to the manager." Aisha nodded, but inside her heart raced. She had felt it, the shift, the moment where something almost came out. As she left the room, she pressed her hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing. The walls of the mansion felt closer now. The secret felt heavier. Her mother's unfinished words echoed in her mind. There were truths buried in that house. Truths about her family. Truths about the billionaire. And with every passing day, it felt like those truths were slowly rising to the surface, whether Aisha was ready or not. The air in the mansion began to feel different, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Aisha could feel in the way people looked at her, in the way conversations lowered when she passed by, in the way her name was suddenly spoken more often in quiet corners. What had started as a simple decision to replace her mother as a maid was turning into something far more complicated, something she couldn't control anymore. At the hospital, Farah's condition became more fragile. Some days she was alert and talking. Other days she barely had the strength to open her eyes. Aisha tried to hide her fear, but it showed in the way she rushed through her shifts, in the way her hands sometimes shook when she counted her small savings. One night, Farah grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "If something happens to me," her mother said, struggling to breathe evenly, "you must be brave, no matter what you hear, no matter what you find out." Aisha felt her throat tighten. "Please don't say that, Amy. You'll be fine." Farah looked at her with a look that held love and deep regret. "There are things I should have told you sooner." But once again, she grew too tired to continue. Back at the mansion, the billionaire was also changing. He started staying up late in his study, going through old files, old records, even old photos. He didn't fully understand why, but something inside him felt unsettled. The girl's presence had opened a door in his memory he hadn't walked through in years. Names from the past started to surface, faces he had forgotten, decisions he had buried under success and time. One evening, he held a photograph in his hand, the same one Aisha had noticed before, the woman in the background. He stared at it longer than usual. His jaw tightened. A feeling of unease settled in his chest. At the same time, the strict senior housekeeper made a move that shocked Aisha. She called her aside, away from the others. "You should be careful," the woman said in a low voice. "This house is not a safe place for secrets." Aisha felt her heart pound. "I don't understand." The housekeeper studied her face closely. "You remind me too much of someone, and that worries me." Before Aisha could ask more, the woman walked away, leaving her standing there with her thoughts racing. Then came the message that changed everything. Aisha was called to the office late one afternoon, not to clean, not to serve tea, but to speak. The billionaire was waiting, standing near his desk, his expression serious. Another senior manager was in the room. The atmosphere felt tense, formal, and heavy with unspoken meaning. "Sit," the billionaire said. Aisha obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "There are some things we need to discuss," he continued. "About your mother, about her time here." Aisha's heart felt like it might stop. At the same time, her phone vibrated silently in her pocket. A message from the hospital. She didn't look at it, but fear washed over her instantly. Something told her this was no coincidence, that everything was coming together at once. The billionaire leaned forward slightly. "There are details in our records that don't make sense," he said slowly, "and your presence here has raised questions." Aisha swallowed hard, her mind spinning. Was this it? Was her secret about to be exposed? Was her mother's past about to be dragged into the light? Outside the office, staff members whispered. Inside, the air felt too thick to breathe. Somewhere between the hospital bed and the billionaire's desk, two paths were about to collide. And just as Aisha gathered the courage to speak, the door opened unexpectedly. Everyone turned. And in that moment, with her heart racing and her future hanging in the balance, Aisha knew that whatever happened next would change her life forever. The door opened wider and a nurse stepped inside, her face tense and her eyes searching the room. For a second, no one spoke. The billionaire looked confused. The manager stood up slightly from his chair. Aisha felt her breath catch in her chest. "Miss Aisha," the nurse asked softly, "I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's about your mother." The room seemed to shrink. Aisha stood up so fast her chair nearly fell. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shaking. The nurse hesitated. "Her condition has changed. The doctors want you at the hospital immediately." The billionaire watched her closely now. This was no longer just a work issue. This was real life, unfolding right in front of him. He nodded once. "Go," he said. "We will continue this later." Aisha didn't wait for anything else. She rushed out of the office, her mind racing, fear and guilt mixing together. As she ran through the long halls of the mansion, she felt the weight of every secret pressing down on her. Whatever her mother had been hiding, whatever connection existed between her family and this powerful man, it was all slipping closer to the surface. At the hospital, the smell of medicine and quiet urgency hit her like a wall. She reached her mother's room to find doctors and nurses moving quickly. Machines beeped softly. Farah looked smaller than ever in the bed. "Aisha!" Her mother whispered when she saw her, her voice barely there. "Come closer." Aisha took her hand, tears filling her eyes. "I'm here, Ammi. I'm here." Farah pulled her closer with weak fingers. "There is something you must know," she said, forcing the words out. "About him. About why I stayed in that house for so long." Aisha leaned in, her heart pounding. "Tell me." But before Farah could finish, a doctor gently stepped in. "She needs a rest," he said. "Her body is very weak." "No, please," Aisha begged. "Just a minute." Farah tried to speak again, but her voice failed her. She squeezed Aisha's hand instead, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. Back at the mansion, the billionaire stood alone in his study after Aisha left. He felt a strange tightness in his chest. He picked up the phone and made a call. "I want everything on Farah," he said quietly. "Her employment records, her background, anything from before she came to work for us." The person on the other end paused. "Sir, some of those files are very old." "Find them," the billionaire said firmly. As the call ended, he looked again at the old photograph, the woman in the background, the years he had tried to forget, the choices he thought were buried. At the same time, the strict housekeeper stood in a dark hallway, speaking on her own phone in a low voice. "She's here," she said. "The daughter, just like you said." There was a pause. Then she added, "Things are starting to move. The truth won't stay hidden much longer." Back in the hospital room, Aisha sat beside her mother, watching her chest rise and fall. Her phone buzzed again. A missed call from the mansion. Then another. Two worlds were closing in on her at once. Her mother's unfinished confession, the billionaire's growing suspicion, the hidden connection no one had fully named yet. Aisha felt it deep in her bones. Whatever her mother was trying to tell her, whatever the billionaire was about to discover, was bigger than just a job. It was a story that tied their lives together. And very soon, someone was going to say the words out loud. The next morning, everything came to a breaking point. Aisha was called back to the mansion, her heart heavy after a long night at the hospital. Her mother was stable for the moment, but weak. Before Aisha left, Farah had looked at her with tearful eyes and whispered, "Be strong today. The truth is finally coming." Aisha didn't fully understand what that meant, but she felt it. When she arrived, the atmosphere in the mansion was tense. Staff stood quietly along the walls. The senior manager, the strict housekeeper, and even a family lawyer were present. The billionaire stood near the window, his face serious, holding a folder in his hands. Aisha, he said, turning to her. Please come in. She stepped forward slowly, feeling like the floor might disappear beneath her feet. We found records, he continued. Old records. About your mother. About her time here before she became a maid. Aisha's heart pounded. What do you mean, sir? The billionaire opened the folder and pulled out documents and an old photograph. The same one. The woman in the background was now clearer. That woman, he said quietly, is your mother. A wave of shock rushed through Aisha. That's not possible, she whispered. She was just a worker. The billionaire's voice softened. She wasn't always. He took a deep breath, as if preparing himself. Years ago, your mother worked here in a very different role. She was trusted by my family. She helped take care of someone very important to me during a very difficult time. There were decisions made, mistakes, and then she disappeared from that part of my life, only to return later as a maid. Aisha's eyes filled with tears. Why didn't she tell me? Because she was protecting you, the billionaire said, and perhaps protecting me from my own past. The strict housekeeper stepped forward. She knew things, she said, things about the family that were never meant to come out. That's why she stayed quiet. That's why she stayed small. At that moment, Aisha's phone rang. The hospital. She answered with shaking hands. After a few seconds, her face went pale. My mother, she's asking for you, Aisha said, looking at the billionaire. She says it's important. She says you need to hear this from her. Without another word, the billionaire made a decision. Take me to her. At the hospital, Farah looked exhausted, but her eyes were clear. When she saw the billionaire, her face filled with emotion. I never wanted this to come out like this, Farah said weakly, but the girl deserves to know. Aisha held her hand tightly. Years ago, Farah continued, I helped protect something that would have destroyed this family. I stayed quiet. I took a smaller role. I became invisible, but I stayed close to make sure no one got hurt. The billionaire closed his eyes slowly. You saved more than you know, he said. Aisha looked between them, her voice trembling. Save what? Farah turned to her daughter. I stayed in that house to protect you too, she said softly, because the truth connects you to that world in ways you never imagined. The room fell silent. Aisha's breath caught. What do you mean, Amy? Farah tried to speak again, but her strength faded. A doctor moved closer. The billionaire stepped forward, his voice low. There is more, he said. More about your birth, more about your past, and more about how you are connected to my family. Aisha felt the ground shift beneath her. The main conflict had cracked open, but the full truth was still just out of reach. As the machines beeped steadily, and her mother slipped into a tired sleep, Aisha realized something terrifying and life-changing. She wasn't just a poor girl who replaced her mother as a maid. She was part of the story much bigger than she ever knew. And just as she thought the truth was finally clear, she noticed a strict housekeeper standing quietly at the door, watching with a strange, knowing look, as if she was holding one last secret, one that could change everything all over again. The strict housekeeper didn't speak right away. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, as if weighing a heavy decision. Then she slowly stepped into the room. Her voice was calm, but there was emotion behind it. It's time, she said. There's no point hiding it anymore. The billionaire turned to her. What do you mean? She looked at Aisha, not with suspicion this time, but with something closer to sympathy. Her mother stayed silent to protect everyone, the housekeeper said. But I was there too. I saw what happened years ago. I kept quiet because I was told to, because it was easier. Aisha's heart pounded. Please, she said softly, just tell me. The housekeeper took a deep breath. Your mother helped protect you from a situation that could have taken your future away. There were powerful people involved back then. Decisions were made in fear and confusion. Your mother chose to step back, to live a smaller life, to raise you away from all of it. The billionaire looked shaken. She gave up everything, he said quietly. Her position, her security, her chance at a different life. Farah, weak but awake again, opened her eyes slightly. I would do it again, she whispered. For her. Tears ran down Aisha's face. She finally understood. Her mother hadn't just been a maid. She had been a protector, a shield, a woman who chose sacrifice over comfort, so her daughter could grow up safe and free from a past filled with danger and secrets. The billionaire stepped closer to the bed. His voice was softer than Aisha had ever heard it. I owe you more than I can ever repay, he said to Farah. And I owe your daughter the truth, and a future that doesn't begin in fear. Farah managed a small smile. Just make sure she never has to live small, she said. That's all I ever wanted. In the days that followed, things began to change. Farah slowly started to recover, surrounded by better care and support. The billionaire personally made sure her treatment was covered, quietly and without conditions. The staff at the mansion treated Aisha differently now, not as just a maid, but as someone whose story they respected. The strict housekeeper, once cold and distant, became gentler. One evening, she stopped Aisha in the hallway. Your mother is a brave woman, she said. You come from strength. Never forget that. The billionaire also had a private conversation with Aisha in his study. There were still details he couldn't share yet, parts of the past that needed time and careful handling. But he made one thing clear. You will never be just a maid here, he said. Your life is bigger than that. Your future is bigger than that. Aisha nodded, feeling a mix of relief, sadness, and hope. She still had questions. She still had a past to understand. But for the first time, she felt seen. As for the mansion, it no longer felt like a place of secrets and fear. It felt like a place of truth finally coming into the light. Aisha continued to work for a while, not because she had to, but because she wanted to stay close to her mother and finish what she started. But everyone knew her path was changing. The poor girl who had replaced her mother as a maid was no longer just surviving. She was stepping into a new chapter. And the billionaire, once surrounded by power but empty of trust, found something he hadn't expected, a sense of responsibility, and maybe even a chance to make things right. In the end, the biggest surprise wasn't the secret itself. It was the strength of a mother's love, the courage of a daughter, and how one brave choice turned a hidden past into a hopeful future. The mansion stayed the same on the outside, but inside, everything had changed.